Featherfall. Bean's mother, Palmer, had to fight the temptation to call her Mrs. Beans, was a perfectly normal-looking woman whose teeth were as white as the icing on her son's 10th birthday cake. Waving her arms like a conductor, she led them to the raucous happy birthday and dashed out generous globs of ice cream. As soon as Bean tore open his presents, baseball from Palmer, pocket knife from Henry, Campbell's baked beans from Mutto called, "Treatment, treatment," and dragged Beans outside. The gang headed up the street to Farquhar's house. Mutto banged on the front door. "Farquhar, Farquhar!" No one answered. So they circled the entire house, Mutto rapping on every window and door he could reach. He threw out his arms. "Nobody home!" And then strange thing happened. Beans, instead of being relieved that his arm was spared, said, "Let's go find him," and trotted off after his own treatment. "You're crazy," said Henry, who, like any normal kid, hated the treatment. Henry, not always had to be prodded to face Farquhar. "Why do you want to go looking for it?" "'Cause I ain't 10 till I get my treatment," said Beans. In a sense, it was true. Among the four friends, there was a feeling that neither calendar nor cake made birthday not officially for it to be official until your arm had to feel the sting of Farquhar's knuckles. And it was a dilemma. You wanted to be a year older. You did not want the treatment. And you couldn't have one without the other. And the very least, it slowed you down for once in your life. You were not in a hurry. But Beans was in a hurry. Trotting through the town, checking Farquhar's usual haunts, knocking on doors and friends calling out his name. Beans seemed anxious at first, then frantic, as if not finding Farquhar would condemn him to be a 9 forever. Then it finally found Farquhar kicking a ball on the soccer field, as Beans, then Mutto and Henry and Palmer lagged behind. The day could not have been more pleasant. The sky was blue, the air was warm, the crack of the baseball bars could be heard in the distance. Newborn leaf clusters are on the round of the trees, and look of pale green popcorn. Tufts of onion grass sprouted across the soccer field, releasing their sweet scent. But the scent that entered Palmer's nose was the sour smell of gunpowder. The soles of his feet tingled as he walked upon the ground and that halted the fall for thousands. Beans, eyes shining, his face excited as he accepted the treatment. And then Farquhar finished. He noted Beans' face registered no pain. He frowned at his famous knuckle. He bent it into Beans' face for a better look. "You okay?" he said. Beans threw up both arms in the air, as if one of them had not just been demolished. "I'm great!" he shouted. "I'm 10!" He backed off then until he stood alone in the field. No birds sang on the trees. No wings flew overhead. Beans made a fist of both hands and held them out before him, end to end. The grin on his face tilted. His teeth appeared squishy. Around came his throat, and two closed eyes snapped opposite directions. He crowed, "I'm a Wringer!" Palmer shivered. His own birthday was 3 months away. Palmer came home that day to find Dorothy shooting baskets in his room. "I asked your mother if I could come in. She said so I could play basketball." Palmer sniffed. "That's a lie. You're here for Nipper." He glanced at the window. The pigeon was due at home any minute. Dorothy laughed and bounced the weightless ball off Palmer's forehead. "Stop me," she growled, scooping the ball up, and suddenly was leaping into him, over him, her knees in his chest, jamming the ball into the 4.5 foot high basket and shrieking, "In your nose, out your toes!" She laughed and bounced the ball off his nose. When he got over the shock, Palmer joined her, the two of them fighting for the ball, at each other, cackling like a pair of chickens. Palmer wasn't surprised to find Dorothy in his room, since he had told her about Nipper. She had come over often. Her mother, thrilled that Dorothy was back in his life, received her like a daughter. As for the Beans boys, as they sometimes called themselves, by spring they had tired of tormenting Dorothy and pretty much ignored her still, but did not come over when they were around. And whenever she saw Palmer with them at school, she acted as if she did not know him. Palmer sensed that she was doing this for his sake. Dorothy sat on the edge of Palmer's homework desk. "So, how was the big party, Snots?" she said with a sneer. Palmer shrugged. Okay. "What gross stuff did you do and your best friends? Did you eat dead muskrat, Snots?" "Not really. And don't call me Snots." "Why not? That's your name, Snots, isn't it? Snots." When Dorothy talked that way, Palmer could not always tell if she was serious. "It's just my gang name." "I'm sorry. I'm not in the gang," Dorothy said. "Look at all that great stuff I'm missing. Nope, no neat name for me. No dead muskrats. No torturing people on the way home from school. No making mother scream. No treatment on my birthday." She rolled up her sleeve and she put out a pouty face. Look at that, Snots. Not one bruise. I want a black and blue arm. I want to have to do everything with one hand. I want some pain." Palmer's middle knuckle rose from his fist. He came at her with a wicked grin. "Okay." Dorothy screamed and hopped back from the desk and then reeled about the room. She's screaming, he's laughing, and it wasn't until they quieted down that they heard tapping. Nipper. Nipper was let in, and as usual went straight to the top of Palmer's head. This brought a complaint from Dorothy. "He never stands on my head. I want him to stand on my head." "Hold still," said Palmer. He leaned forward to Dorothy until their foreheads were touching. "Go ahead, Nipper. Go to Dorothy." Nipper would not move from his perch. Dorothy stomped her feet. "Phooey!" "Wait a minute," said Palmer excitedly. He transferred Nipper to the basket rim, then left the room and returned a minute later. "Nipper has a thing about ears," he said, "especially if there's something in your ear. One day I had an earache, and I had one of these in my ear," and he held up a small wad of cotton. "He kept pulling it out." Dorothy took the cotton wad, pressed it into her ear. "Yoo-hoo, Nipper," she called. "Look what's in my ear." She stood in the middle of the room with her left ear to the rim. Without a delay, Nipper flew to her head, bent down, and plucked the wad out. She flew back to the rim and let the wad fall through the net. Palmer and Dorothy cheered. "Two!" Palmer scooped up the foam ball, slam dunked it, and it thrust her to his chin at Nipper. "In your face, bird." Nipper nodded and pecked him on the nose. Dorothy cracked up. They were laughing and playing ball when Palmer, letting fly a shot from beyond the bed, said, "Do you like my father?" Dorothy watched the ball bounce off the door. "What kind of question is that?" "Do you?" "Sure, why?" "Do you think he's nice?" "Yeah." "Don't you?" Palmer thought for a moment. "Yeah, he is. I guess that's the problem." Dorothy rolled her eyes. "You're talking goofy. What's the problem?" "The golden bird." Dorothy threw the ball at him. "Will you please make some sense?" Palmer looked across the room at Dorothy. She was back in the homework desk, brown hair funneled into a ponytail by plain rubber band, pale blue t-shirt, blue jeans, black and white sneakers swinging above the floor. Some old, across the street Dorothy he had known all of his life. Yet, somehow, not the same old Dorothy, though she looked as the same as Palmer had been seen something else in her lately. Whatever it was, registered not in his eyes, but in his feelings. It was not clearly known to him by its absence. In the company of anyone but her, it made him feel floating. The previous summer, Palmer's mother had taken him to an outdoor Y pool for swimming lessons. The first lesson was floating. The instructor told him to throw back his head, bring up his feet, and allow himself to lie on his back on the water. This made no sense to Palmer. All of his life experience told him that if he left his feet, he would fall, or, in the case of water, sink. Relax, so the instructor kept saying. Trust the water, it will hold you up. But Palmer could not trust the water. For many days he could not trust it. And then, with the instructor promising not to let him sink, he tried. With the instructor's hand in the small of his back, he tilted back until he felt the water on his neck, on his ears. The instructor had pushed gently upward, and Palmer's feet left the floor of the pool. Lie back, relax, said the instructor. Pretend it's in your bed. It's your bed. Trust it. So he lay back, tried to trust. He could see nothing but the instructor's face, and beyond the vast blue sky. And then the instructor's face was gone. His hand was gone, and the voice was saying, "You're floating." Palmer got the same feeling with Dorothy. He knew that he could let go, and she would hold him up. Tears filled his eyes. He let go. I don't want to be a ringer, but everybody else is a ringer when they're 10. I'm going to be 10 in 71 days, and then I'm going to have to be a ringer too, but I don't want to. So what kind of kid am I? Everybody wants to kill pigeons but me. What's the matter with me? He said it all. He said all the things he had been thinking and feeling for years. He said the things he didn't even know he had been thinking until he heard him come out of his mouth. He told her how he hated the golden bird, the trophy his father had won the year for shooting the most pigeons. He told her how it confused him. How could one person be both a shooter of pigeons and a loving father? He apologized for joining the tree stumping and calling her names. You don't really look like a fish, he said. Oh, thank you, she said. He apologized for not inviting her to his last birthday party. He apologized for the muskrat carcass. My mother was shaking, she said. He told her about Bean's party, that the night they came to his bed and led him to the railroad station to the boxes of birds. He told her about the time he saw Nipper fly overhead and was seen by the guys, and how scary it was to be the only person in town with a pigeon. About his dreams at night, how he told her sometimes he wished he had not joined up with those guys at all, and he told her again and again that he really did not want to be a ringer. Dorothy hopped down from the desk. She walked across the room, stood before Palmer, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Then don't," she said. It made it sound so simple. Palmer snickered. He got up from the bed, kicked the ball around. "Yeah, don't. Easy for you to say. You're not a boy. You don't have to grow up with this scared to be 10. "I have an idea," said Dorothy brightly. "Why don't you just skip it to 10 and go right to 11? Or tell everybody your birth certificate's wrong and you just found out that you're really 21. Palmer stomped his foot, sending Nipper in the blink on the basket rim. "It's not funny." Dorothy shrugged. "Well, you didn't like its serious answer. If you don't want to be a ringer, don't be a ringer," she said, sat on the bed. Palmer shrieked, "I can't not be a ringer." Nipper flew to the bedstead. "Everybody is a ringer. You have to be a ringer. That's how it always was. And you don't know you're a girl. What do you think?" He sneered into her face. "I can be the only boy in history of the town who was not ever a ringer? What makes you think?" He poked his finger at her. "What makes you think Beans will ever let me get away with it? They would drag me out of bed and out to the park. They would wring my neck." From her seat on the bed, Dorothy stared at her poking finger. She took a hold of it and pulled it, drawing Palmer closer until his face was inches from hers. At that point, she grabbed his earlobes and pulled him even closer still. She smiled broadly and then kissed the end of his nose and laughed. Palmer froze a moment, stunned, and then crumpled into laughter himself. They laughed and played games with Nipper for the rest of the afternoon. For much of his life, Palmer LaRue felt he was standing on the edge of a black, bottomless hole. On the 59th day before his 10th birthday, he fell in. Daffodils clustered like bugle bands from the yards. Bean's boys left school behind on a sunny cloudless day. It was a day in which everything seemed possible. The only problem being is making a choice. Bean wanted to head for the creek to hunt salamanders. Meadow craved a stone fight. Henry felt like baseball. And Palmer, he couldn't decide. Or rather, he didn't want to decide. He simply wanted to enjoy the bright spring day, the company of his friends. There was nothing he wanted to do. He simply wanted to be. But this was not something he could explain to himself, much less the guys. They came to the corner of Maple and Cane and stopped. A decision had to be made which way to go. Palmer was about to throw his vote for baseball. Then suddenly, the sunlight was briefly snipped as if a page had been turned in front of a light bulb. This was followed by a turn of a flapping sound, the feel of a pair of four-toed feet in his hair, and then the deep-throated treble of the familiar voice. Palmer's mind rifted through the thousands of answers to account for all of this, but only one made sense. Nipper had just landed on his head. 3 mouths gaped open, 6 eyes, round, tiny places stared. Suddenly, Bean's face became red, shrieking mass. Pigeon! Hands reached, wings flapped. The four-toed feet were gone from his head. Knowing at once he must act, Palmer looked at the fleeing bird. Hey, come here, he called, reaching up, running after. Hey, bird, get down here! The other two were running, reaching, shouting, and they gave chase for a full block until the gray flyer vanished over the first tops. As they slowed to walk, Palmer began to talk. Man, did you see that? Do you believe it? Where do you think that came from? I thought I was going to have a heart attack. You sure it was a pigeon? What would a pigeon be doing around here? Maybe it's a crow. It kind of looked like a crow to me. It was a pigeon, said Beans. His voice was not friendly. Palmer did not return Beans' stare. Really? He pretended to scan the skies. If that thing ever comes near me again, he made a chopping motion, I'll whack it. He bent down and showed the top of his head to the others. He ruffled his hair. Did it poop in my head? No one answered. He straightened up. He dared not look at them. They walked in silence. He felt their eyes. His heart was thumping. The bird is yours, Bean's voice said from behind. Palmer turned. They had stopped 10 steps ago. It felt like 10 miles. Palmer spread his arms. He crouched as if to leap high in the place. What? Meadow pointed. It's yours, ain't it? That's why it landed on your head. And that one's one we saw fly over us the time at your street, said Beans. Yeah, croaked Meadow. Palmer laughed. You're crazy. Why would I have a pigeon? I hate pigeons. I'm going to be a ringer. I'm going to wring their necks. I'm going to whack them. An empty soda can was lying in the gutter. He stomped on it with all his might, stomped again, crushed it, flattened it. He picked it up, dashed to the sidewalk, and stomped on it some more. Whack 'em! Whack 'em! I hate pigeons. I hate them all. He looked up at the staring, glaring eyes, and he clenched his fist and screamed, I'm going to be the best ringer there ever was!